Good afternoon. How's it going, everybody? Thanks for joining me. I am Auron MacIntyre. Obviously, a lot going on with the third day of Trump's presidency. The hits have continued to come, the executive orders have continued to flow. We have seen the issuing of a repeal of affirmative action, at least from the executive side of things, and just more and more Trump is allowing people to be deported, apparently without any kind of need for asylum, the asylum process. I'm looking more into that, see how these things are kind of flowing fast and furious. So we're going to continue to check this out. Actually, on Friday, I'm going to have Jeremy Carl on, and we're going to get in, with some more depth on the official nature of these different executive orders, how they impact specifically affirmative action and many of the other things that Trump has promised to work on. So we'll do a deeper dive on that. That's not the topic of today's show, but obviously just wanted to point out that Trump is taking action. He's doing what he can with the executive pen, and obviously there's a lot more to get done. The executive orders, anything that is done with them can be undone with them, and so you do need to submit these things into law. The changes that he has made to birthright citizenship and other things are monumental changes. They are huge wins if they stick around, so they need to be solidified. But of course, that will take more time. But he is in just the first few days that he has had this power. He has wielded it quite significantly. It is very much what we had hoped. Again, we're only 10 yards in. There's still 90 more to go, but the first down is there. It looks good. I'll continue with the sports metaphors until we get there, but we are seeing very positive action early on, very encouraging. So that not going to be, again, the core of this episode, but I just wanted to get out there and say, very impressed early on. It looks like Trump is focused, dedicated. He has a much better vision, and the people around him have a much better vision. They were prepared to hit the ground running, and that is extremely encouraging. That said, the topic of today's stream is going to be juridical defense. Now, juridical defense is a concept that you do not hear about a lot in elite theory. Most people hear elite theory and they say, okay, elites are in charge, decisions are made by those at the top. There's always an organized ruling class, and they're the ones that wield power. And it's really easy, because those are all really important points of elite theory, to believe that that's kind of all there is to it. Okay, we have these elites. They are really the ones that make the decisions. They're the ones that set the rules. That basically just means that power can do whatever it wants, right? Like, big surprise. The people at the top have all the power. They wield the power any way they want. That's the end of the story. But that's not the end of the story. It's actually far more complicated, and a big part of that is juridical defense. Now, this comes from Gaetano Mosca. His work, The Ruling Class, is one of the most critical, foundational texts when it comes to elite theory. You can actually get this now. It's actually reasonable to pick up. I had to originally read it as some kind of PDF pulled off a website, but today they're finally printing copies at a reasonable price. You used to have to pay $300-400 sometimes to get an actual physical copy. Today it is something that you can pick up on Amazon or something for $20, something like that. So if you want to read the actual book, and it's I would say a challenging read for someone who's not familiar with political theory, but it is not very extremely difficult. It is not. It's not Hegel. It's not critical theory. It's not one of these where he's spinning you around with all of these technical terms, trying to confuse you. You need a decoder ring. It's not even Nick Land. It's readable. It's challenging from the sense that the topic is dense and complex. But he is not writing in a way that obscures what you're trying to understand. So if you want to read The Ruling Class for yourself, I wouldn't say accessible is the word, but it's a mountain you can climb. I think if you put your time into it, it's not something that you're just going to go through and say, I have no idea what this was trying to say. So getting to the actual topic at hand, like I said, Gaetano Mosca, one of the foundational guys when it comes to elite theory. And again, while he makes the point that the ruling elites are the ones that make all of the biggest decisions, ultimately, that one of the things that defines a good and just nation, one that is a society that you want to live in, is the fact that power is actually constrained in some way. That there are rules that everyone, even the powerful, ultimately have to obey, or at least, if not have to obey, are encouraged to obey. And we'll kind of get to the difference there in a second. So one of the things that people don't understand about power, one of the things that is often confused, is that there are different states of order, right? And this is often a mistake that conservatives and libertarians make, is they think that you just kind of start with liberty. And if you have a country that is based on liberty, if you have a nation that is based on liberty, then everything else flows from that. But that's actually the wrong way to understand social organization. All society begins, I guess you can kind of say at some level, in states of disorder, and they move towards states of order. That's kind of what you're doing when you're building a society. You are starting in disorder. You have the state of nature, though that's not real. We're not embracing kind of the Hobbesian or Lockean understanding of state of nature here. Just saying you have a situation in which there is not a lot of order. The society is rather loose. There's not a lot of formal order. And then you increase that level of order. And so at your base level, you kind of have war, right? Like that's the least organized, least orderly state, is a state of war. And then you move from a state of war to a state of monopoly of violence, right? Like once there is one person or one organization that has control of kind of the application of violence inside a society, you move from a state of war to at least a state of managed peace, right? You have some level of peace and order inside your society. So you go from war to order, and then you go from order to law, right? Law is the next step, where first you just had people fighting each other, then you have the monopoly on violence is sealed into one organization or person. They have authority, but that authority is not checked by anything, right? So it's better than war because you don't have this constant fighting. You don't have the war of all against all, the Hobbesian state. But it's not still ideal because all the power is concentrated in one organization or one person, and they can kind of do whatever they want. And so the average person is kind of stripped of any rights, any ability to defend what is theirs. There's no private property, really, ultimately, because the person in charge can just kind of do what they want. So you go from war to order, then you go from order to law, and law is constraining the power of those that have the monopoly on violence. Those have the ability to wield the power of the state. And finally, then you can have the opportunity to cultivate liberty, right? Once you have gone from war to order to law, then if you have a juridical defense, which is what we're going to talk about today, you have the opportunity of liberty. So juridical defense is a critical step in kind of your ascending the orders of civilization. You want that to be there as part of your civilization. That's going to do a lot to define the lives of the people living inside your society. So Gaetano Mosca says that, yes, of course, we want order, right? We want to move from the state of war to the state of order. But we don't want to just stay in the state of order. Yes, the elites are going to have the power. It's going to be concentrated there. It's going to run things. But we want to move to the next level. We want something that constrains that power. Now, the problem for, again, a lot of conservatives and libertarians, they think the way that you constrain power is just by saying it, right? Like you write it down on a piece of paper. We made a law. We have the law now. We're using the law. You have to follow the law. We can point to it. Constitution says it right there. You got to do it. That doesn't work. That is insufficient, right? And Gaetano Mosca says this specifically. You can claim that everyone is equal before the law, but that is useless. That does nothing. He points to many historical examples in which people have declared themselves to be, rather declared their nation to have equality before the law, but in practice it never happens, right? Like they announce that, but then in function, it never occurs. So it's not enough to just say that exists. You actually need something that enforces these, right? So you need this juridical defense, right? And so when you're instantiating this, it has to be more than just a piece of paper somewhere, something you've written down. It is something that you want to have imposed through opposing power, right? If you've ever heard me talk about Bertrand de Juvenal, you recognize that this is something that he and Gaetano Mosca agree on, is ultimately what creates opposing sets of, or what creates a restriction on power is opposing sets of power, or what Gaetano Mosca calls social forces, right? So these social forces oppose each other, and that's what actually creates this defense, right? That's what actually creates this way in which that power can be constrained. It's not constrained by the law itself, just the written document. It's constrained by other social forces that will be able to push back against what they are doing. Sorry, one second. All right. So he says that this defense is ultimately a core respect for government and law. And so the amount of respect for government and law in any society is really going to define the quality of life of the people living inside of it. And he says often that this is thrown into chaos during times of technological and economic advancement. So this is something that is can exist in your society, but then can kind of be suspended as like radical changes. And so when we see technological and economic advancement, we can think of it as a good thing, but it's actually something that can throw kind of the respect for law and order and government into periods of chaos. So we kind of think of this progress as a constantly good thing, but it might not be for the people who are living under it. In certain situations, yeah, maybe you have quality of life increases because like new medical technologies come out, or you can feed more people, and that's great. But those are also going to create like social revolutionary forces that are going to upend the different ways in which your society was balanced. Because again, social forces are what actually creates the ability to have this defense, to have this codification of law and this respect for the law. The political organization of your society is what is going to determine the way that this defense takes place. So, you know, it's not just something that emerges out of nowhere. Your society needs to have a certain level of complexity and organization, a way in which it is formed so that this can exist. And again, he says the worst scenario, right? The way in which this is least evident is when all of your power is unified in one place. So he, despite being an elite theorist, right, he's not actually for absolutism. He thinks that absolutism is going to quickly dissolve kind of the quality of life of people inside your society. And ultimately, you don't want these super simple unified powers to exist, or your ability to have a judicial defense is just going to fall apart, right? It's going to fall apart. And so any scenario where your power is completely unified in one place is kind of the lowest level. Again, it moves you from the level of war to the level of order, but it's not ideal. You don't want to stay there. That you need additional complexity. You need additional divisions of power for this to really work. And he goes with the classic Aristotle, Polybius, the classic assertion that the mixed constitution is what actually restrains power, right? That's what really creates the most balanced society. And so he says we want to see these emergent social forces that are going to allow for the mixed constitution. But the thing is, you can't just kind of will them into existence. They have to be real organic forces in your society, or no one is going to respect and follow them, right? So if you have, the king, and then you're just like, well, we'll just kind of create these other social forces and they'll be the ones that kind of dial back his power. That's not going to work because no one's going to respect those social forces. They're just going to follow what the guy with power says. You need real organic forces that kind of emerge inside your society that wield true power and can kind of constrict what that original bringer of order had. The bringer of order is still really important, to be clear. He's not disrespecting the bringing of order. He's not saying that we don't want that. He recognizes this as a critical step towards the betterment of society and the complexity of society. But ultimately, you have to move beyond that. It is not enough to just have that kind of unified singular power. You need organizations that are going to go ahead and push back against it. Again, not just because you wrote them down on paper, not just we said there are 3 branches of government, so therefore they push back. No, you actually need real organic sources of these social forces that are going to say no, and they're going to have a foundation deep in kind of the custom, tradition, understanding, and day-to-day life of the people that you are interacting with. So, sorry, check my notes here real quick. I got lost for a second. There we go. Okay. The power of the social forces have to be organic. And so he kind of goes through all the ways in which you want to kind of follow the development of this defense, right? How is the average person going to be secure in their private property? How are they going to know that power is not just going to come around and rip away from them what they built? You want a certain level of security in that ability, right? To have that on in your society. If people are constantly worried that the tyrannical king can just come by and tear up whatever they've made, I've accumulated wealth or property, I've built this thing, my family, like I value all these things, and the power can just rip it away, then you create a great degree of instability in your society, and you also remove the incentive for people to build things on their own. Again, I'm not telling libertarians anything they don't know here, right? Private property is kind of the basic thing that incentivizes people to build and create. So you need that, and so he kind of runs through the ways in which those social forces are created that will give you that level of security. The first thing he suggests, he says, the very first thing you need to do if you want to create opposing social forces is you need to break away the secular and ecclesiastical powers. And you might have heard of this separation of church and state, right? Now, it's not exactly the separation of church and state that we think of today, the like hyper Reddit atheist version of it. What he's really saying is you don't want your priest caste to rule your entire civilization, because the power of the divine is too much. And he recognizes, Gaetano Mosca is not against religion. He recognizes the power of religion, the necessity of religion. He says that this is one of the things that helps civilization, though he's not 100% sold. He points out that Ethiopia is a Christian society, and high civilizations in Europe are Christian societies. So just pointing to religion and saying that's sufficient to understand the constraint of government or social forces, that's not enough. But he's not anti-religion, right? He's not attacking religion. He's not saying it's useless. He's not saying that this is what you don't need this. He's just saying ultimately you don't want your priest caste to be running the society, because if their word is law, right? If the king is just completely divine, if he is the God emperor, then there is no way you're ever going to get any opposing social forces, because you've unified the 2 most important social forces in any given society. So there's never going to be any kind of opposition. He's really recognizing the power of religion there as an opposing social force. And he says, you want that outside, right? You want that outside instead of being, completely locked into the ruler. You don't want the divine and the ruler to be the same thing. So that's kind of the first thing that you need to do in order to create the possibility of opposing social forces. You want the church to be able to push back against the state, and the state to be able to push back against the church. You don't want them unified into one thing completely. That doesn't mean that the state needs to be entirely secular. It doesn't mean it needs to not recognize religious tradition or identity. It's you just don't want them to be exactly the same thing. That's more of what the founders had in vision when they were kind of avoiding the establishment clause. It's not we can't have any religion in our society. It should never inform our laws or what we do. We just don't want it to be exactly the same. The religious power and the government power should not be one to one. The next thing he says that you need to do is you need to think about how you're going to distribute kind of wealth and power in society. And here he's not saying, we need to have some kind of central communist, structure that's going to unify the economy or decide where money's going to go. What he means is basically you want a middle class. That's really what he's talking about, is you need to develop a middle class. Because if all the power and money is going to be unified into just the ruling elite, then their interest is going to be all that matters. There's going to be no pushback against it. There's going to be no opposing social force, because just like if you have all the power concentrated into the divine, there's going to be no opposing forces to each other. If you have all the money and wealth and power in one class entirely, then there will be no opposition to them. And again, he's not saying there won't be an elite class or a ruling class, that you need to abolish the ruling elite, get rid of the idea of the ruling elite. He designed the elite theory. He very much understands that there will always be a ruling elite. But he is saying that if it's all unified in that ruling elite, if there are no other stakeholders in your society, no other classes that have permanent property and wield authority, then you can't get opposing social forces, because everyone is so dependent on the ruling class, on the upper class, that they never really have any kind of pushback. And so it's really important that you kind of create a middle class so that there are people who are landed, who own property, who are kind of outside the system that is completely ruled by the elites, so that you don't have this complete monopoly on power at the top. The high and low of De Juvenal versus the middle is trying to get rid of that, right? So De Juvenal points out that power is always trying to get rid of that middle class for this reason, because it recognizes this middle class as an opposing social force. And so it's naturally working against that. But if you're not just interested in your own power, if you're interested in the good of society, you actually do want that middle class so it can continuously act as a bulwark against abuses. You want those opposing social forces, right? You want an expansion of those social forces by the way in which wealth and power is distributed inside your society. Another thing that he points out is that you really need time and organization. Another reason you need a middle class is that they're going to have the spare time to create organizations that can push back against kind of the concentration of power. So you can't have a formal defense if there aren't organizations that are working to push back against the powerful. If you have a middle class who has excess wealth and some leisure time, they have the time to organize. And when you have the time to organize, you have the ability to create different institutions that are serving your interests. And so you can have different community organizations who are recognizing the needs of the people in your area, and that can push back against just the ability of the ruling class to step in and control everything all the time. You want people to have the ability to go to churches, community organizations, fraternities, guilds, unions, all of these things, so that they don't always have to go to the organizations that are created or go to the direct power of the ruling class. That you want to have a middle class and its opportunity to appeal to those organizations so they can push back. And this is, again, where you get this idea of the defense. You also need time in the sense of you need tradition, right? Like you need time in the sense that you need time to organize so that you can push back, but you also need tradition. This, again, it's not enough just to say, well, we're going to manufacture a middle class tomorrow and that'll restrain the power of the elite. No, you need to build traditions into your society. Ideally, the organic traditions of your society will cultivate that middle class, right? The complexity of your society is not flat. It's not just the ruler up top with all of the power and money, and then just everybody else doing their own thing. They don't have any organization. They don't have any tradition. They don't have any organic understanding of their place in society and the way in which they can organize for their own advantage. You want to have those traditions that kind of inculcate that for people in different generations, because the longer institutions exist, the longer they are respected, and the more they will have to be respected by the ruling class. The ruling class does not want you to have traditions, which is the opposite of what most people think, right? Like, most people think that, oh, conservatives are trying to keep traditions because that's what holds people down, right? Like, that's always the narrative that you heard from kind of progressives, is that the traditions of the society are there to hold you down, keep you in place, do what the man tells you to do. But actually, Mosca is saying very much the opposite, that these traditions restrain the ruler much more than they restrain the ruled. Because ultimately what you're looking for, as always, you'll see this theme over and over again. I've talked about it quite a bit, and it comes up in pretty much every thinker that I talk about. You need virtue, right? What you're looking for ultimately is people who restrain themselves and expect the government to also be restrained by those same rules. Because the government is looking and saying, oh, well, we can't actually force people to do this because they're disciplined, they're controlled, they have accumulated power and organized their own institutions. And so there's only so much we can demand from them because they exist in that state. Unvirtuous people who are given to vice, people who are not organized, people who are slovenly, they're weak, they don't have strong family bonds, they don't have strong identities, they don't have strong religions. Those people are easy to manipulate, easy to rule. Again, the flatness of the society, right? You've just got all the money, all the organization, all the power up top, and then you've got everybody else at the bottom. That is not going, there's no defense in that scenario. There's nothing for the average person to appeal to, right? But if you have a situation where there's a strong middle class and they are creating organizations, they are virtuous, they are organized, they are taking the time and intentionality to create this, there's a strong tradition of expecting those organizations and those beliefs and those family bonds and ties and communities to be respected. If that exists, then power is just looking at that and saying, I don't think I can do that. I actually don't think I can do that. And ideally, they won't want to do that, right? Because they will themselves be restrained by those very same traditions and expectations. But again, it's kind of the inverse of what you would expect if you were listening to progressives. Oh, the tradition is what's tying you down. No, because you are tied down, because you are disciplined, because you are virtuous, you can resist the efforts of the elite to control you. Like, actually building that community, building those bonds, keeping them healthy, building those alternative social forces that push back and provide defense actually strengthens your ability to refuse power. That's what guarantees your private property, your rights, as we call them in the United States today, right? Because if you have those expectations, the rights don't come from the Constitution. The Constitution doesn't give you the rights. Now, in the Constitution, we say they're God-given rights, right? And that's true in a sense, but in on the earth here, as it's practiced, how power is actually constrained, the reason that those rights are so resilient is because people believe in them, in the sense that, oh, they are given to me by God. And because I believe in them, the people around me believe in them. We all respect them. They're built into the way we interact with each other day to day. So I believe completely that you have a freedom of speech. I believe you have the right to own a firearm. I believe in your right to a trial and you being secured in your papers in person. Like, these things are believed on a fundamental level by everyone in the society, and so therefore they are real. And that's not fake. And it's really important, because again, a lot of people look at that and they'll just say, power just does whatever it wants, and all that stuff is fake. All of those beliefs are fake. So as soon as power disrespects them, they can just tear them down. No, that's exactly the opposite of what Mosca is saying in the ruling class. He's saying that, no, these things are very real if everyone is invested in them, if everyone believes in them. The political formula is not just a noble lie. It's not just a lie that power tells to stay in power. It is something that power believes ultimately, and that the people believe. And that reciprocal belief is what imbues it with the power to restrain government and restrain the behavior of the people. It gives government its power, but it simultaneously restrains its power as well. And so if you have a constitution that just says, well, you wave it around like, I've got free speech because it says so right here. No, I've got free speech because if the government tries to lock me up, me and all of my friends who also believe in free speech are going to fight back. And we've got the backing of the church, and we've got the backing of the community, and we've got the backing of every social organization that is existing, because we are working together toward a shared moral vision. We have this innate understanding of who we are as a people, and this is how we conduct ourselves. So if power steps in and says, oh, well, actually, we're going to arrest you for conducting yourself that way. No, you aren't. Because most people are going to refuse to even comply. You're going to have so much non-compliance. You're going to have police and soldiers that won't do it because they already believe this at the core, that every one of these expectations is layered in to your belief system. The social forces are too great, and that is what gives you this juridical defense, right? That's what actually creates the defense. And again, this is what Mosca expects from a complex and good society. He does not expect power to be able to do whatever it wants, whenever it wants. All right. So another thing so those are the things that you need to do to build this kind of defense, right? You need opposing social forces. You need to separate the divine and the secular, at least, again, not purging the divine, not denying the existence of the divine, not saying we don't appeal to the divine principles when we're creating law, but just that the actual enforcement mechanism, the governance itself, is not priestly. It is done by a separate force, so that these, the kind of the government force and the religious force can oppose each other. They can push up against each other. So you need to do that. You need to just make sure that power and money are distributed somewhat in your society, that you build a middle class that is able to push back against these forces. You need time and tradition, right? You need time and organization and tradition to cultivate all of this stuff. So this is the stuff that he says it's going to stand against it, right? That's going to push back. Now, the thing he says to watch out for, the thing that you really need to watch out for, is the unification of a principle or a pattern. So he says if one principle or pattern comes to dominate your society, then it's going to start to dissolve these opposing social forces. You need to watch out if everyone and every aspect of your society starts to get organized upon one line. That's bad, right? So what we actually want is our church to be organized in a very different way than our government, which is organized in a very different way than our businesses, which is organized in a very different way than our family structures, which is organized in a somewhat different way than our community structures, right? Each one of these different forces needs to be organized on different principles. Once you start organizing everything on the same principle, even if they were opposing social forces, they will start to dissolve and become one thing, right? If you've watched this channel before, you probably know where I'm going with this. This is the problem of managerialism. This is the problem of modernity. This is what creates the total state. Because if you start with a bunch of different social forces that you are relying on to push back against each other, and then you start organizing everything on one principle, all these different social forces that were separated and creating that tension and creating that defense against power, they start to come together. And all of a sudden, you get one unified whole. And in the modern world, this kind of managerial, utilitarian, entirely secular understanding creates a unifying principle, right? We all have to organize everything on the principle of massified, secular, kind of deracinated bureaucracy. That is what everything needs to be organized on. I don't care if it is if it's your church. I don't care if it's your government. I don't care if it's your business. You're even dating is, it gets done by dating apps now, right? They all get collapsed into the same type of organization. The church is run like a business. The government needs to be run like a business. In fact, these are considered positive steps by a lot of people, right? I want my government to run more like a business. I want my church to run more like a business because that's more efficient. I'm going to start running my household like a business. Like people say stuff like this. They really think it. In fact, we just had Vivek Ramaswamy's back on Twitter. making gym posts once again. And he made a post about meritocracy, and like we need to have this unified meritocracy, and kind of pointed out that, well, meritocracy is often good, but if you do everything as a meritocracy, you'll kind of ruin it. If you run your family as a meritocracy, you're going to destroy your family. If you run your church as a meritocracy, you'll destroy your church. Now, meritocracy has a place, right? I want my dentist or my surgeon to be selected for merit. I really want a meritocracy in that scenario, but you don't want to run your house entirely as a meritocracy, or you're going to have serious problems. So it's not that meritocracy is bad. It's just that it's not one tool all the time, right? It's not one unified thing. And that's always the danger. If you'll notice, like that's always the danger you run into is when you try to do this grand unifying theory, because the real world is actually complex. It's far more complex than you know and that you understand. One human actually doesn't grasp everything. That's why tradition is so important, because you, as an individual, as rational as you might be, you're never going to understand everything. You are not smarter than the collective wisdom of your civilization. So even though you think you have reasoned your way to the best thing, actually it's often better to appeal and follow traditions, even if you don't understand them. And that's really the hubris of modern man, is like, well, every person will just decide for themselves. Well, actually, no, they won't. Because if you think that you're going to every single individual you meet can reason their way to the truth, then you haven't met very many individuals and you're not very honest with yourself kind of about your own limitations. And the same is true when it comes to social organization, right? If we are organizing our society entirely in one way, and every single thing we do is based on this like mass bureaucratic, highly scalable model from our family structures, our dating, our religion, our businesses, our government, our social interactions, everything is based on this model, you start to dissolve all of those social forces that pushed back against power. And power, once again, becomes unified. It's like a fire without any brakes. It can just run right through because everything was kind of put in the same box. And he actually points to this being the problem with the current American situation. He says, originally, Baron de Montesquieu, when he wrote about separation of powers, and he's the guy who influenced a large amount of our founding fathers, when he wrote about separation of powers, what he was saying was not that like 3 was some magical number of branches of government. You don't actually stop power by just saying, and now in the Constitution, I've put in Article 1, 2, and 3, they give you the Congress and the executive branch and the judicial branch, and therefore power is solved. The problem is solved, right? No, the branches of government were supposed to represent opposing social forces, right? In something like England, you would have the king, and then you'd have the nobility, and then you'd have the church, and then you'd have the merchants, and then you'd have the peasantry, and all of these different social forces had some level of representation. When Rome was really a republic at its best, right? You had, you had the Senate, which was representing kind of the upper orders, but then you had elections at lower orders. You had all of these different social forces. You have the different priests. You have different forces pushing back against each other. And that's what creates certain expectations. It doesn't just let one person kind of run through and do whatever they want. And so in reality, it's not just the division of power. It's not just the separation of powers that actually checks power. It's the social forces that that power is invested in. And so the less we have separate social forces, the more we run into this problem. So when the different branches of the government were, you had the executive, which was kind of like a king, and then you had the House, which was truly kind of the body of the people, and then you had the Senate, which was kind of the more aristocratic. It had to be, the people had to be the senators had to be selected by the state governments, so they weren't just directly elected by the people. And then you had the judiciary, and that was kind of representing its own thing. It wasn't open to democratic forces, and all of these different ideas were separated. All these different social forces were separated. Now, you could say, and this is an open question, this is something that is somewhat suggested in the ruling class when he talks about this. You could say that ultimately the lack of social classes, like firm social classes, and a more active state church in the United States might have doomed this model, because you don't have the level of ingrained social force that you have in other societies, right? And in many ways, that's because they're more ancient, right? The landed nobility, the church, they came of kind of like this feudal era where they weren't designed this way. It's not like someone sat down and tinkered with all the aspects of kind of European feudalism to create this balance, but they kind of emerged in this manner. And because they did, they were very deeply grounded, like the rights of the nobility, the feudal lords, the expectations that the church had, the beliefs that the peasants had. They were all kind of already deeply ensconced in those traditions. And so when they kind of came together, they naturally ended up checking each other. And that's why, England had a much better time of it and probably advanced more and had a more robust tradition of juridical defense than many other civilizations, because it had, the church was in one place, the king was in another. You had the nobility, all these different things. The power was spread out in a much more organic way than it would have been in a more unified society, right? In the United States, you just didn't have those forces in the same way. Now, I think in the United States, we were saved mainly in our own kind of feudal-esque system of federalism. The United States was just too large, and it was never really centralized. And the cultures and the distance, just the vast territory of the United States, made it very difficult to centralize power in the way that it had been in other areas. And so even though we didn't have perhaps the social class that divided power, we had the geographical differences and divisions that really divided power. And so for a very long time, power couldn't unify, not so much because we had deeply ingrained social classes and expectations that drove it apart, but because it was just wildly different. The way that people in Georgia and the people in Maine lived was just very, very different. The people living out west lived radically different lives than people living in Massachusetts. And so it was just very hard to unify a territory of that size. And our federal system really acted as in the same way that kind of the feudal system did in many of these European civilizations, in dividing power and creating separate social forces and expectations. But the more that technology advanced, and again, you'll remember one of his disruptors, one of the things that often disrupts judicial defense is technological advancement and economic advancement. Once we started to get the train, once we started to get the telegraph, you get the plane, the automobile, telephone, newspapers, mass media, there comes the disruptor. There comes the unifier, right? You think of unification is a good thing. You think of progress is a good thing, but maybe it isn't in this scenario, because all of a sudden those barriers to power, those opposing social forces that had been created inside the different pockets of America, those started to dissolve as technology came and disrupted that order. And we started to see the reliance on these unified, massified bureaucracies in order to operate these new technologies and generate these new sources of wealth, right? So again, this isn't, we're not attacking wealth here. We're not attacking technology necessarily, but we need to understand those things come with consequences. And one of those consequences is upsetting social orders and social forces that were providing this juridical defense. So again, the point here is that power exists, and it's always looking to basically eliminate these things. That's why power always wants to get rid of the middle class. That's why power is always looking to get rid of the privileges of the aristocracy. That's why power is always looking to unify with religion. That it's not a mistake that kind of our centralized total state created its own straight religion in wokeness. Those things are all ways for it to unify and dissolve, eliminate, and bring in those social forces that once opposed it in under its own auspices, right? And so recognizing that elite theory is looking at power and saying, yes, a ruling elite exists. Yes, a ruling elite will make most of the decisions and will have most of the influence and will drive society and tastes. However, that is not all that elite theory has to say on the issue of power. In fact, Gaetano Mosca did not believe that ultimately you should just, that the goal should be to unify power in the elites, to unify power under one person. He said ultimately we do want this defense, that the mixed constitution, the robust society, the complex society that makes sure that there's a middle class that has its own power and wealth, that there is a church that is separate from the state that can wield its own influence, that there is different social organizations layered throughout, so that when you go to court, when you are locked up for protesting, when the state wants to come and steal your stuff, there's a robust tradition and there is a robust network of other social forces that will push back against that. That when private property is violated, when the rights of the parent are violated, when the individual is victimized by power, they don't stand alone. The way to oppose power is not as the individual. That's really critical. That is really, really critical. It is not individual rights that stand against the state. It is the collective will cultivated through tradition, belief, and separate social forces in society that push back. Power checks power, right? It is ambition that checks ambition, to use the language of the founders in the Federalist Papers. It is never just the individual rights, and this is where conservative and libertarian rhetoric falls off. This is the mistake they make. They think that you start with the liberty. I've got the individual liberty, and then that's what provides me with everything else, right? I've got this liberty, it exists, and therefore everything else has to respect it. No, incorrect, right? You're moving up the steps. Once you have each step, you can move to the next one. And so the liberty exists after you have collectively created the right of judicial defense, right? After you have secured order against war. Like, you have to do each step, and you may not get to the final step. Many civilizations don't. But Gaetano Mosca is saying you want to get there. You need to get there. You don't want to just exist in any of these lower states. So I just wanted to go over this because A, there's often a confusion between kind of conservatives and libertarians on the steps here. And B, there's confusion about elite theory and what it actually says about power. Again, a lot of people focus just on, okay, elites wield power, end of story. You should learn to exercise power and want to grab power. No, you actually want a situation in which power is constrained, but you want to understand how it is constrained. You don't just want to kind of vomit out the entry-level civics stuff when it comes to that. You want to understand the more complex social structures, because we kind of hollowed out all the complex social structures and just left the judicial system there and pretend like that was the same thing, and it really isn't. And that's pretty critical. So everyone should have this level of defense. You should have, your cousin Vinny to be able to stand up for you. It's one of my favorite movies, actually. Just hilarious. I never get enough of it. But you want to have that defense, but you can only have that defense in the courtroom if everyone in the courtroom believes in the principles that they are going through, that the judge has real power, that the law has real power. And the only way that the law ever has power is because everyone believes in it. We talk a lot about the rule of law, right? But the rule of law is really only the collective rule of men, right? It is the law is only an instantiation of the agreement between men on what is true and what is real and how power should behave. And the only way that power will ever be disciplined and ever behave is if opposing social forces, opposing power, is standing in its way. All right, guys. So let's go ahead and take a look at the questions of the people here real quick. Andrew Guller says, totally off topic, but I've been meaning to ask, are the voice weapons from the David Lynch Dune movie true to the book? The voice is a command in the book, and it can compel you to take action. I'm trying to remember if there is actually a weapon in the book. It's been a while since I've actually read the original Dune novel. Maybe someone can help me answer that question, because I don't believe so. Like, I don't think they channel the voice through a specific weapon, but maybe they do. Maybe that was part of the weirding way. In the book, they have the weirding way, which is the way that the Bene Gesserit fight, right? And they can like move hyper fast and that kind of thing. The voice is part of their system, but yeah, I don't know if it was actually created as a physical weapon in the book. I'm trying to remember if that's the case. All right, and then Andrew also says, a serious question this time. Given Curtis Yarvin's thesis that all effective governance boils down to the skill of the ruler, isn't government by executive fiat the most beneficial in the long run? Let's see. The thesis that government boils down to the skill of the ruler is... Yeah, well, I mean, actually, that kind of definitely falls into what we just discussed there, right? So, in a sense, yes, right? If you're going to have the most basic form of government, and this is acknowledged in Plato, this is acknowledged in Cicero. They say, they say the mixed government is best. Well, Plato doesn't, say that, but Aristotle does. Cicero does. The mixed government is best, right? However, if you're going to have a simple form of government, if you're going to choose between one of the three basic forms, oligarchy, democracy, or monarchy, you want the monarchy because that kind of direct rule of the best person will have the most benefit, right? But ultimately, and that would be what Yarvin says. Yarvin is for the unified executive. He just wants the king to have the power. Let's get rid of the pretense. Let's not slow things down. All the best stuff is done by a monarch, and boom, done, right? So that's what he would say. I would say I'm a little closer to what Mosca is saying here, and what guys like Aristotle and Cicero have said, that the mixed government is kind of what you are looking for. However, I think that you need a much stronger executive than what we have now. What we have now is not a mixed government, and that's what Mosca also points out, because we dissolved all of our branches through kind of the mass democracy. We've really turned ourselves into a oligarchy, because in mass democracy, voting is really what can you give me, and and what who can manipulate my opinion. And it turns out oligarchs have the money, and so they have control of the media, and they can kind of manipulate the opinion of the people. And so if you kind of dissolve all your social forces in the way that we did, you end up with kind of the oligarchy we have now. So we don't really have a strong executive. So I wouldn't say that you just want everything done by executive fiat, because it does open you up to the problems that Mosca and our founders explained. However, I do think you need a much, much, much stronger executive. The fact that we've kind of opened everything up to democracy at this point dissolves all of those opposing social forces, and so therefore our executive looks very weak, right? It doesn't do a very good job. All right, guys, we're gonna go ahead and someone said answer is there are no voice weapons in the original Dune. It was just part of the book. That's what I thought, but I didn't want to 100% answer that, because I thought that was the case. You had the weirding way, but I didn't remember. I was like, I don't think there are voice weapons in the book, but it has been a while since I read the original. So I'm glad somebody was able to pull that up for me. All right, guys, thank you everybody for watching. If you enjoyed this show, or it's your first time on the channel, please make sure to go ahead and subscribe, like, notifications, all that stuff, so you can catch the streams when they go live. If you would like to get these broadcasts as podcasts, you need to subscribe to the Auron MacIntyre Show on your favorite podcast platform. And if you do, make sure that you leave a rating or review. It really helps with the algorithm magic. If you'd like to read or listen to my book, The Total State, it's now out on audiobook as well as the regular book, where I talk a lot about Gaetano Mosca and the other elite theorists and these opposing social forces and how their elimination creates the total state. If you want to get more of that fleshed out, then you can pick up my book or listen to it in the audiobook form. And of course, if you would like to get any merch to support the show, you can head over to the Blaze website. It's shopblazemedia.com, and there's all kinds of shirts and hats and mugs and other things that you can pick up to support the show. I want to thank everybody for watching, and as always, I will talk to you next time.